Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Aspen Ideas Festival. We're excited to be talking with you this afternoon. I'm David Leonhardt with the New York Times. I'm joined with this wonderful panel, whom I will introduce to you all shortly. We're going to be talking about the state of the media and the future of the media with a real focus on the subscriber-based model that has really risen in popularity over the last few years in all kinds of parts of the media. Joining me on stage this afternoon is Baratunde Thurston, founding partner at Puck. And I'm just going to tell you what these folks are doing currently, but you'll hear more about their background as we get into the conversation. Jessica Yellin, the founder of News Not Noise, and Charlie Sykes, a founder and writer at the Bulwark. So I want to start by kind of talking about where we are right now, because in many ways it is sort of fundamentally different and surprising. The cliche for a while, the conventional wisdom was that information wants to be free, that journalism and other media publications could not charge people, that particularly younger people, who over time become older people and represent more and more of the audience, weren't willing to pay for their journalism, and that this presented a fundamental threat to the media. And much of the initial digital media business model was based on this idea. It was based on the idea that people wouldn't pay. The New York Times and many other publications were free for a very long time. It was an advertising-based model. And what I think is interesting about that is that even though the internet is obviously fundamentally new, it actually was an old idea. For much of the 20th century, readers also were not paying for their news. You didn't have to pay for Walter Cronkite. You didn't have to pay for Tom Brokaw. You had to watch ads. And while you did have to pay for your morning newspaper, you weren't really paying for it. Circulation, subscription dollars did not make newspapers profitable. Advertising did. And so it looked like the internet was going to turbocharge this model. And instead, it sort of seems as if it's flipped it. And because of developments over the last few years, now people are paying for their media. They're paying for it in a way that they didn't in the old analog world. They're paying for newsletters. They're paying for big publications like the New York Times. They're paying for all kinds of things. And so the place where we want to start today, and Baratunde, I'll start with you, and we'll kind of move down, is why is it that we went from this cliche that information wants to be free and people weren't willing to pay for their news and their information, which actually wasn't new but was consistent with a lot of history? How did we go from that to this time in which we're all talking about Substack and lots of publications are now charging people for access? What happened?
Right, just that, huh? Okay.
Simple question.
What's up, everybody? Good to be here. Can we get a round of applause for Jessica Yellin's shoes? They're amazing. Thank you, Jessica Yellin's shoes. So great, so great. I think the shift to the attention economy is a big piece of this, and the way we could capture attention is very different on the internet than we were doing in newspapers, direct mail, cable news, and these other models. And once we started selling humans and little slices of our behavioral profiles, that shifted things. I did a data detox a few years ago. I wrote a piece for Medium, which 5 people read, but it was really good. and I was tracking the trackers and trying to see like who knew what about me. I read the terms of service for like 3 apps. Could have gone to law school faster. But I realized that even the Washington Post, with their very pro-democracy, like democracy dies in darkness phase, was tracking me in a very unpleasant way. I think when people realize that the free information that we're getting really isn't free, that the zone has been flooded with so much noise, and when even these publications start behaving, and not just publications print, but these outlets start behaving like influencers, and sort of seeking even more sensationalism and being rewarded with likes in the same way that someone on YouTube going for the likes will do, it kind of lowered the bar and lowered the credibility at the same time that the talent at those organizations said, I don't need all this. There's a lot of overhead and a lot of restrictions with not a lot of upside. And I'm being prevented from doing speaking gigs I want to do. I'm being prevented from seeing the upside of the traffic I'm generating. And so it just felt like this gift to this entity that wasn't giving back. So to the reader and to the talent, both sides of that relationship, I think that posed a major challenge. The last piece I'll say is those brands who were spending money, they found other ways to grab hold of audiences that didn't rely on news media to be the medium, for the commercial information that they were trying to convey.
Jessica, how has your experience sort of given you a sense of what caused this change?
First, I'm so thrilled to share the stage with all of you. I'm a super fan. My story, it's helpful to explain my story a little.
Please.
And then tell you what I think happened. I was in legacy media for 2 decades, and I covered the White House for CNN. I was at the top of that whole, ecosystem, and I felt like there was a way we weren't speaking to part of the audience. It was a lot of anger, negativity, and outrage, and a lot of people were shutting their ears and turning off. And my idea was this was overwhelmingly women. And I thought about how could we reach them differently? And there are a ton of women on Instagram, and I left and I started doing the news on Instagram. And the idea, I call it news, not noise, because the idea is to give people just the information they need without added anxiety. We don't trigger your anxiety unnecessarily. So I started just explaining the news, what's going on, and I built out this brand. I now have a newsletter on Bulletin, and that's the subscription piece. And I do a podcast, I do, the whole array. Why do people pay for it? They trust me, and they think they know me. And I have a relationship with my audience that is entirely different from when I was on CNN. I could be speaking to millions one night into that camera lens, and I have no idea how my words resonate. I have no idea how they're responding. Now, I pick up my phone at home, I talk to Instagram, and I immediately am flooded with DMs saying, hey, I know someone in my city who you should talk to. Hey, I don't know what that word means. Would you explain it? I have another idea. They are in conversation, and we've built a community. So what are they paying for? They're paying for trust. They trust me in a way they wouldn't have trusted me, or they even trusted the institution. And I think that's a trend. Individuals over institutions, something we heard here. Yeah. I think that there's a piece of this that's about the community. They like that they are in a community of shared values people. Some are center left, some are center right, but they have similar values. And then they like my mission of giving them information without a panic attack. That's my tagline. And so they just want to support it because it makes them feel good to support it. So it's trust, community, and the mission, and I think that's what they're paying for.
Charlie, all this makes sense to me. I'm still left wondering, why did it change? I mean, part of me thinks that it was Steve Jobs basically charging people $1 for songs. Yeah. And that made people think, okay, so I'm paying $1 for this song. I'm willing to pay $2 for this publication. From your perspective, why is it that people who 20 years ago wouldn't have been willing to pay for the New York Times or the Bulwark or whatever now are?
I actually think all of this is very confusing because all of these things are happening at once. People refusing to pay, and then the focus. You mentioned some unique publications. What percentage of the audience out there is paying for the content, though, or outside of the really successful, unique voices? And I think Jessica mentioned trust and community. That's important. I do think that this has been an extraordinary transition for certain kinds of journalism and information, but it doesn't deal with kind of the problem that you hinted at, which was the decimation of non-elite journalism in the United States. Yep. The number of news deserts, the number of cities that used to have 300 reporters that now have a dozen. In city after city, the consequences for all of that. They were, of course, wiped out, by the Craigslist raid on classified advertising, which who knew classified advertising was so important? But they were wiped out, and it's not clear to me yet that they figured out the formula for being economically viable, but also having a large footprint. And just one last thought, what I'm getting at is that we're sort of trading writers, particularly the ones that you were talking about before. Information wants to be free, writers want to be independent. They also want to make money. And so, the incentives for these writers who, may be talking to 1 million people on a daily basis, they go into a newsletter where if they have 1,000 readers, they make $100,000 a year. If they have 10,000 readers total, they're millionaires. So they are independent, they are successful, but then the question is, are we now shrinking the number of people that have access to it? You've traded the size of your audience for all of this. This is a real problem with journalism. So the Washington Post, the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, LA Times maybe, they will be able to do this. Will that be the case for journalists around the country who aren't on cable television or hadn't built up a certain amount of celebrity writing for The Atlantic? So these are all questions that I fully haven't figured out.
I actually think it's a really important dichotomy. There's a set of issues with the national media market and a set of issues with the local media market, and we probably should, I appreciate you're saying they really are different. Let's make sure, let's put a bookmark on the local and come back to it, because to me they really are so different. The national media market in a lot of these ways actually strikes me as healthy from a financial perspective. And I say this in part to invite any disagreement. I don't know whether any individual newsletter will survive. 50 years from now, maybe the Washington Post or the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal will have failed. But it feels to me that we have established that that these national high-quality publications and writers are going to be able to make the digital transition. That doesn't worry me anymore. Does it worry any of you more than it worries me?
Go ahead.
I think they could change. I think that they could change to adapt more of what we're doing, and that there could be a time when they're repositories for creators, and that there's creator journalists, and they have to evolve faster than they are in order to keep up with the way the media landscape is changing. This is like a snapshot in time, and the change is rapid.
There's, you talked about relationship earlier, Jessica, and I think y'all have this at the Bulwark too. Thank you for existing.
Thank
you.
Still sane Republicans in the world. I love to fight you, but like with words.
Yeah.
I never thought that would be a special thing in America. Let's just fight with words and laws.
Yeah.
The issue of trust and the issue of relating and having a relationship, I think the business model will probably adapt, but I think there is something kind of odd about cable news being funded by Viagra so heavily.
Yep.
I think there is a level of patronization of the audience that comes from some of these old media outlets where they still think they know what's best and don't trust their audience, or they don't want to admit mistakes. I mean, I had a personal, my media history is high school newspaper, college newspaper. I worked for The Onion for 5 years, America's finest news source, running all of their digital and political coverage. I worked for The Daily Show and relaunched that with Trevor to bring that into the digital age. And I did my Substack thing, I did my MailChimp thing, and now I'm doing this Puck thing, and I'm with PBS now. So I'm all over the place. But there are times that I've heard in these vaunted, hallowed halls of old media, specifically, you can't admit you're wrong, in front of the audience. They won't trust you anymore. I'm like, they won't trust me if I don't admit I'm wrong. But that fear and that clenching to this old idea is a very paternalistic attitude toward the audience, that we have to spoon feed them, that we know best, even though we're covering the most narrow slice of the world. That is not going to survive. And it's not just the financials that are causing the exodus. It's the patronization and the alternate options that you have, both for the writers and the creators of the news or the conveyors of it who want that relationship, but also for the audience that now has ample other examples of what real sounds like and what real feels like. And YouTube is way more real. So it's kind of hard to go back from that and be like, blah, 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 blah. Yeah, okay, whatever, buddy.
And the illusion of infallibility,
yes.
Right? Which the audience completely
mistakes.
Understands is an illusion.
Yeah.
But those of us who grew up in that kind of old media sometimes like to pretend that it's not. But it's, as you say, that's gone.
It's over.
And it's a good thing, right? The idea that, journalists are human beings. We make mistakes. We should be able to admit that. That doesn't make us not journalists anymore. I saw you wanted to get in.
No, I was. I'm sorry to give you the yes and the no answer about it. I mean, more power to the writers who are able to basically work for themselves and be rewarded for all of that. The economics, again, very, very skewed to encourage them to go off. But again, they're going off into these various silos. They are being taken out of the non-paying discourse in some ways, and I think that that's unfortunate. But I also think that it's inevitable. I mean, the upside of the reason I'm hedging on this is because the upside of this, the liberation that it has for information, but also the way in which the market has shown that it will pay for high quality, that if you have a relationship of trust, they might want to continue that in that way. And by the way, once you have that relationship of trust, you can admit you're not infallible, and have that accepted in good faith.
I'm obsessed with finding solutions. That's what and so I hear that, and I think this is, there's so many people who want to support these independent journalism outlets. You ask them to pay $5 for themselves and buy 5 other subscriptions that we can donate to other people. I mean, that is part of a future model where we can create ways for people to get this content as well. We just have to be innovative. And I think one of the crucial pieces of conversations like this is not just problematizing our moment, but thinking creatively about how we can look at these problems and come up with constructive solutions. Because we need the media to be available to inform our electorate in this time of crisis in our democracy, right? And I think there are easy solutions to some of this. And I would just add to what you said about trust. Like when I tell my audience I messed up, and I say, wait, you guys, I made a mistake, I just want to correct this error, I get donations, I get messages of praise and thanks. Those are the highest engagement moments. Because what I also think we need to appreciate is our audiences are much more sophisticated than they were 10 years ago, and they know we're not infallible, and so they are grateful when you're just transparent about that.
Right. So the old model, the kind of mass media model of old, clearly had enormous problems. I mean, it was almost exclusively white men, right? At the New York Times, Jewish reporters used their initials in their bylines to look less Jewish, right? That's why A.M. Rosenthal was not Abraham M. Rosenthal, or Abraham Rosenthal. So the old model had all kinds of problems. But Americans did tend to get information in a shared way, right? Everyone watched Walter Cronkite, to exaggerate only slightly. How much, Charlie, you used the word silos. How much do you all worry, and Jessica, I'll start with you because I think you're explicitly trying to overcome this. How much do you all worry that we're splintering in such a way that, to use an exaggeration that both Charlie and I would reject, but I'll use it for emphasis, anyone who reads him doesn't read me, right? How much do you worry that this subscriber-based model basically makes that problem worse?
I don't. I believe this is a huge problem in our culture, and it is right for us to talk about it. But I think that, with absolute respect to my former employer, CNN does this on a huge level. Like CNN, Fox, these networks are polarizing our country in the way that they're presenting the news. I think that all of the media is part of this challenge, and I think it's a cultural moment, and these models aren't accelerating it or decelerating it. We have to figure out ways to work within it. So I'll give you just a little, like Charlie crosses party lines. They've created in the Bulwark a new entity that models something different from what you see with these left, right, traditional outlets. And I think that this creates a space for innovation through the subscriber model that then can be adopted by some of these more legacy media outlets that are risk averse and can actually show us the way forward and through this.
Baratunde?
I subscribe to the Bulwark, just for the subscriber model is
now.
helping. Don't put that out in public. Canceled instantly. I think I have a Charlie-like answer on this. I do worry. So yes. I also think that the seeds of the disconnect are planted much deeper and earlier than the emergence of the subscription model. And so part of what I see is like IRL is starting to reflect online behavior. Online behavior is driven by algorithmic compound interest kind of models where they feed you further and further down a rabbit hole that you wouldn't necessarily have stumbled into yourself. But the machines are just like, it seems like you like sugar. Here's all the sugar. And so you end up getting a little more radicalized, pushed toward this edge or that. And then politics is reflecting that. Our members of Congress are, many of them are behaving like influential troll type people and being financially rewarded for it. And that doesn't have to do with a subscription model, but it does have to do with an attention performance model that's rewarded by catering to niches. So I worry because I don't think these tiny mirrors reflecting these little slices of ourselves is going to help us feel connected to the broader sense of ourselves. And I hope that the subscription model doesn't exacerbate this underlying trend. I don't have the total answer, but I would be lying if I said, no, we'll be fine. We're clearly not fine. and I think we need to try to see, each other more clearly.
Charlie, yeah.
I'm at the far end on this one. I am super worried.
You are.
Super worried about this. As someone who's been part of a lot of things that I thought were good ideas that have turned out to be bad ideas, I do like the subscription model. I like the being on Substack, all of those things. But this siloing of information and its impact on American democracy and culture cannot be overstated. I mean, it's gone from echo chambers, to bubbles, to now these alternative reality silos that are almost impossible to pierce. I think sometimes we don't see that because we don't cross over into those lines. But if, as a country, if we continue down this path of having, no shared facts, no shared issues, things are going to get even worse than they are. So I am hoping every time that we have something that creates a diversity of voices that it will, help 1,000 flowers bloom. That's what I hope. But I've also seen how it just results in more people reading things that they do. For example, let's say, a former colleague of yours named, Barry has a newsletter, and only people who like Barry are going to read her newsletter. And so that's a siloing away. These are people who might have bumped into heterodox ideas in a different forum, but we all have very loyal readers who read us because we tend to agree. We are brilliant because we agree with all their priors. So I am very worried about all of that.
You risk people thinking they're smarter than they are.
Yeah, oh God.
And I think the twist, when I think about sort of extreme sort of white supremacy, I remember realizing like the internet gives everybody a voice and a community, and not everybody deserves that. Like it used to be really hard to be a white supremacist. Like you had to print a zine and get a P.O. box and hope people read your classifieds in the back of this dirty magazine and like wait for one postcard to show up.
Yeah.
And then you just like hang out on a subreddit or 4chan or 8chan or something like that. And so we've gone through this evolution where some of that stuff got mainlined and mainstreamed. They're like, hey, that's not good for the public square. You got to get out of here. And so we start cutting off the payment processing, cutting off the web hosting, and then they go and build their own alternate reality like you're talking about. And now no one's checking them, and I have no idea what they're up to, and they're encrypted channels, and they're little terror cells ready to storm the Capitol again. So it's hard. I think it's a really hard thing, and I don't know, maybe you know, where we go from here.
I'm sorry. It's a digital big sort, right? People move to like-minded communities, and they're doing it in the digital space too. I think it's also important to acknowledge that we used to talk about the front page effect, right? We all got the same front page, so we had the same information. But that's not even an option anymore. My front page from my newspaper that I go to every day is different from yours, because the algorithm feeds me different front page stories. So that's sort of lost to time now, and we just have to find solutions to our current reality.
Charlie, I want to ask you a question specifically about conservative media.
Sure.
And I want to preface it just to be really clear about what I'm asking and not asking, right? I think many of our most divisive debates are not about facts, right? I think the abortion debate is fundamentally not about facts, right? There are strong philosophical arguments about protecting fetal life and strong philosophical arguments about protecting a woman's right to choose. You could do the same thing on immigration, on any other number. And yet, there do seem to be a series of issues in which right-wing media have promulgated ideas that are demonstrably false in a way that left-wing media, whatever its many faults, has not. Where Barack Obama was born, some things about replacement theory. As a kind of scholar of all this stuff, why do you think, and tell me if you disagree with the premise, but why do you think conservative media has been flirting more or embracing more outright untruths than liberal media?
Yeah, boy, that's something I think about a lot, how bad it got and how fast this all happened, but also, the fact that the seeds had been laid decades earlier. Look, part of what happened, and let me go to the end of the story, for me. So, well, let me give you my context here. Conservative radio host, had a very, very good relationship with my audience, which was, primarily conservative. And over the years, you would get false information, false stories, rumors, hoaxes, and people would email them, and I'd take the trouble to email back, send them the source, say this is not true. And for 20 years, people would go, hey, thank you. I'm sorry, I will not be forwarding Uncle Hugo's emails anymore. But then in 2015 and 2016, I found that it was getting harder and harder. There were more of them. There was more misinformation. There were more falsehoods. And when I would point, a fact check, I would get back saying, well, that's, those are those lefties at NPR or PolitiFact or whatever. There was no source that they were willing to regard as reliable. So what had happened is, we had, over the years, with criticism of the mainstream medias, much of that criticism was valid, by the way, but had succeeded in destroying the right's immune system, I think, to bullshit. And so that after a while, because there are these little silos, you could spread these conspiracy theories which become self-validating and are never at risk of being challenged on the outside. And that has been an extraordinary thing that's happened on the right. I can't speak to what's happening on the left, but I think that a lot of people in Republican politics are amazed at how quickly complete falsehoods spread in this new ecosystem. Many, many sources, even beyond Fox News, and how incredibly difficult it is in this current mindset to convince people that these things are not true. The resistance. One of the reasons why you see a lot of Republican elected officials simply refuse to acknowledge the validity of the election is they know that they will be hit by people who believed the big lie and are absolutely immune to information of any kind that would refute it.
What can we do about this, Jessica Baratunde?
You said your name first.
So I think of this a little bit with the Napster example, because I'm from LA. I always think about Napster was this streaming app that let people get music for free long before iTunes or any of this, right? And when the music industry saw this, they said, oh my God, we have to never allow people to stream music because we'll lose money, so we're gonna shut down Napster. And they made all this effort and they killed Napster. It didn't end streaming, right? Like, that's our reality. So what I make the case for is to not fight the old fight. We're never gonna shut down Napster on this, right? We have to acknowledge the challenges of this landscape and come up, use the tools that exist now to find solutions. Is it changing algorithms and making sure that however the algorithms work on all these platforms, they are doing a better job of giving people crossover content? Is it regulation? Is it creating new businesses that take all of this into account and are built with an intention to cross-pollinate points of view? What I'm saying is that let's harness the creativity and the opportunity to solve this rather than like bemoaning a history that's gone.
Go.
Yeah. As long as we acknowledge the history that created the present.
Yes.
And this feels like an infection run amok. And the reasons that the right is more susceptible to bullshit, I think is because the right invested in bullshit and found profit in it.
Yes.
And found profit in it. So there were votes in it or there was money in it. And so there's no great mystery of ultimately incentives explain most human behavior. Like it feels good or it gives me something that I feel like I need, so I'm gonna do it again and again and again. And then the right got addicted to that dirty fuel. And now everybody's like, oh no, there's too much fuel. But it's a bit too late. And so the chance to have drawn that line and said no, I stand for truth. Like you run for government, run for government, standing against government, run standing against truth, and then this kind of emerges. What can help, I think, is people who, if you take the cult analogy or the gang member analogy, the violence interrupter analogy, the best people to intervene are those who've been through it.
Oh yeah.
But we need a scaling up of that. For every Marjorie Taylor Greene, we need 5 others to say I've been down that path, I've worshiped at that church of bullshit, and there's nothing there for you.
Exactly
Yeah.
right.
They're actually using you. They're literally stealing your money and pouring it into poisoning your rivers and poisoning your air and making your education system full of lies. But I can't say that, as effectively as someone who has exited that cult could say. But we need so much more than that, and we need a few bravely placed people, and I think when Fox News it's a successful business, and we prize business success over so much else in this country. So until we start aligning business outcomes with more than short-term dollar measurements, but more moral measurements, more broader health measurements, we're going to keep investing in bullshit.
We're going to open up to questions in a couple minutes. I just want to spend a minute on the local issue. I mean, I really am despairing about the state of local journalism. It sounds like you are too, Charlie. We need local journalism for our democracy. We need people covering school board meetings and local businesses and town hall. And it seems to me that I'm skeptical that there is a profit-making business that can exist right now. I'm optimistic that there are some entrepreneurs who have ideas that I don't. But in the meantime, it really does seem to me like the nonprofit sector is going to have to play a substantial role in local journalism and reinventing it. It shouldn't just look like the old local newspapers, which had a lot of problems. Does all that feel right to you? Are you more or less optimistic than me, any of you, on any part of that?
No, I actually agree with you. I was on the Knight Commission a couple of years ago, and we were wrestling with this whole question of, of the decimation of local papers. And I think that the nonprofit model is the best option because it's really the only one that could possibly work. So it may not work, but the others won't. And this is part of the problem. The economic, the economic model of local journalism has been destroyed. But that doesn't mean that there's not a real appetite for that kind of news. And we talk about people being willing to pay for, exclusive, high-quality content. Well, this is what local media has to do. Really laser focus on serving that constituency, giving them, what no one else is. And I think some of the local metro newspapers seem to be figuring that out. But ultimately, the smaller towns, it's going to have to be nonprofit.
I think the good news is I do think people are very hungry for all kinds of highly tangible information about their communities, right? And they would be willing to pay for that. And then maybe what you make as part of that is covering the school board or covering town hall, right? I mean, if you imagine a place that covered travel sports extremely well, right? A lot of people would pay for that. And that also is an echo of the old world, right? Yeah. Why did people get their local newspaper? I mean, given what I do, I'd love to believe that because they wanted to read the political journalism. It's probably for the sports scores and the obituaries and the restaurant.
People want to look for their own name.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I will just shout out to public media. I'm recent to the public television world with my America Outdoor show. Check it out. Yay. July 5th. It's beautiful. It shows some of the healing potential of our natural spaces to cross some of these divides. But public media still exists, and public stations, some of these places I go to, it's the only local media.
Yeah.
And there's like 300 different stations, and they're the last one standing, and like a Sinclair conglomerate, a region over. So continuing publicly supporting these local media outlets through public media and other models will be the only way, because we can't force business profits on these entities that are serving a larger public good than just finance.
And that's an important point. It's not like the idea of nonprofit media is not new, right?
No, right.
And it's had a lot of success. So let's hear a couple questions. My one request would be, please start right here. My one request would be, please make your question a question for one of our panelists.
Hi, thank you all for speaking about this. It's super important to kind of bring it back to some of the older models. I think it's safe to assume that most people watch or pay for cable to either watch live sports or to watch live news. A lot of live sports is going to their respective streaming services, whether it's ESPN Plus or Disney. So where do you see cable news in 10 years? Or is that going to go back to their respective homes, or is that going to be subscription model? Or where do you guys see that?
Well, we have two people who either have worked or do work in television, so.
Do you have a strong answer on this one?
Do I have a strong answer? And where is cable in 10 years? Does anyone?
I don't have I think smaller. It feels like, my take on cable news is a lot of filler. It's, to be slightly insulting, but as honest as I can be, a lot of cable news is people talking about the news. It's folks reading the New York Times out loud and then weighing in on it and grabbing the nearest analyst of some flavor to add some color, to add some context, to have some people representing Team A versus Team B, but it's not news. And there's a lot of stuff going on in communities, even at the national level, that they're not doing. So I think it's a great opportunity for that whole model to be reinvented away from roundtable discussion into actual, go into the field, gather facts, talk to people, hold power accountable. But that's such a narrow slice of my experience as a viewer of cable news. So what do you want?
Well, I live that. I always say try to leave the building like the news is outside the building. It's just much cheaper to have everybody on a panel talking to each other.
Cheaper. There we
So
go.
There's so much to say here. I think that there is an audience for cable news. I think that what the new boss at CNN who's just come in says he wants to do is the right direction, which is take it back to actually breaking news, explaining news, telling you what's happening in a way that makes you informed. But I also wonder where the limits of that model, if we're looking at the limits of that model. Increasingly, people are getting their news here, right? And there's this new study about creators that says, I think it's like 50% of people who follow a creator feel as close to that person as they do to a member of their own family or a close friend.
Oh, that's scary. Oh,
Right, so I think
I don't want that.
we're in a new reality where in order for those institutions to survive and thrive, they also need to adapt in some ways to whatever this creator economy evolves into. Make sure that their products are not just the same thing you see on TV but streaming on your phone, but include what's new, which means different voice, less hysteria. Don't flash me breaking news when it's not. It's a whole cultural tonal shift. Give me faces who look like regular Americans and tell us different stories. All of it has to change.
Yeah.
In this context, we ought to bring up CNN Plus.
Right.
Because,
Oh,
of
sorry,
course,
what was that?
you know, since we're, yeah.
Do we?
Yeah.
That's mean.
Well, I
man.
mean,
That's
a
mean.
lot of,
The streaming service that CNN announced with great fanfare, and then the new corporate owners.
killed.
Yeah.
So you have a lot of very, very bright people who thought about this and got it wrong. And so the question is, since we're talking about a subscription model, maybe we are starting to run up against that limit. There's just a certain, in everybody's head, there's a number of things they will subscribe
Yes.
to. I don't know what that number is. The correct number is 7. But so CNN figures, hey, people watch us. They'll pay extra money for whatever it is we're going to offer them here on CNN Plus. And the marketplace said, no, we are maxed out on the entities we're going to pay for.
Do you all think some version of the cable bundle will survive the decade? Yes.
Yeah, there's going to be 5 companies. There's always just 5. There's just 5 companies. We're going to come back to
Not
5
7.
companies. It's not 7. It'll be 5 companies. It'll be like you'll have the mouse option, right? You'll have something else, and everybody will live kind of under that umbrella. Also, if you love these internal shenanigans of what's happening in cable news, subscribe to Puck.
True.
Covers Washington, Wall Street, Hollywood, Silicon Valley. My colleagues left a lot of prized journalistic outlets to come together and cover this stuff there.
We have another question.
Okay.
I would love for you to speak more about the future and hope of nonprofit regional journalism, because unless you have somebody who's putting a lot of money in to keep it going, nonprofit regional journalism cannot do a subscriber model. Give us some hope. Talk about that.
I'll do a little bit of hope on that, which is we journalists are not that expensive.
Hey, what are you doing?
Sorry to let us figure it out, but we're not. And a lot of stuff that the New York Times does is extremely expensive. Keeping a bureau in Afghanistan is really expensive for all kinds of reasons that you can figure out. But a lot of local journalism is not actually horrifically expensive. And so the bad news is we live in a society of terrible inequality that has caused living standards for masses of Americans to stagnate. The flip side of that is that there are a lot of philanthropic dollars available to fund things, including for local news. And so I'm not sure that it's going to work, but there are many models around the country. If we had been on the stage 5 years here, we would have been Texas Tribune, Texas Tribune, Texas Tribune, Texas Tribune. Well, there's now Vermont Digger, and there are all kinds of models all over the country. And they take money, and I'm not sure they're going to work, and you have to figure out how to build accountability into nonprofit journalism, because capitalism builds accountability in ways that nonprofit doesn't always. But I think if we can get enough kind of funding there are talented people out there who can do it. And my hope is some places are going to figure out how to do it right, and then there'll be a kind of mimicking of it. I hear we have a question from Katie Couric.
Oh,
No, 'cause I was going to say Trent Krem, The Independent. 'Cause I always
yes!
Good moment.
Yes! Ted Lasso in the house!
speak for yourself, David, that we're not that expensive. I have a question for Charlie. First of all, I've really enjoyed this conversation. But Charlie, so this is my question. I think all of us want to reach a broad swath of consumers. But when you think about 70% of Republicans believe the election was rigged, and I heard another survey, 49% believe January 6th was caused by Joe Biden, the DNC, and what was it? Antifa. Yeah.
Of course, it's always
So, it's really hard to live in a fact-based world and try to reach out to individuals who have an alternate set of facts. So, do you have any advice for reaching out to some of these people who don't really seem receptive to truth?
Now, you were probably hoping for this to end on an upbeat note.
I got you, Kate.
See, unfortunately, all of the things you're describing have been accelerating, and it goes back to this question, what happened to the immune system to bullshit? This is the most difficult question to deal with, because people use their minds, not necessarily to find out what's true, but to confirm their priors or to bond themselves more closely to the tribes they belong to right now. In other words, there are a lot of people out there who want to be told what they want to be told. They want to read what they want to read. They want to be protected against opinions or information that might rattle their worldview. So we also live in a world where not only is the zone flooded with false information, and not only are people lied to, which is a terrible thing, but I think we have a lot of people out there who may suspect they've been lied to. They may know that it's wrong, and they just don't care. So that's what we've all feared, is that all of this is, there's not an agenda to an ideological agenda, and please don't misunderstand me here, that the real goal is the annihilation of truth. That what's happening is, for a lot of Americans, they just don't know who to believe, so they're going to believe what they want to believe. What is most convenient. So this is what makes it so difficult to break through on all of that, because that 70% is in a self-reinforcing loop that is almost impossible. There's not a single fact that I can cite to them. There is not a chart. I can't send one of David's, COVID graphs to them and say, see, you're wrong about this. They'll go, this is that guy from the New York Times, This is NBC. So I would like to be able to say I have an answer to that. I don't know, except to remind people that people only listen to people who have, share their values. So you do need this huge deprogramming, detox program, but Lord knows it's not going well so far.
But it is going, Katie. It is going. It's not over. And the worst case scenario, if it's over, then we can start something new. Death is also birth. So hold on to that as the metaphor. Thank you. Short of that, I was out in For America Outdoors, my PBS series airing next week. PBS.org and the PBS video app as well. And they don't take your credit cards or personal data. So I'm hanging out in Appalachia with this man who's lived in that region for 7 generations. He is like in the soil. And he runs something called the Appalachian Beekeepers Collective. And this is a new business opportunity for former coal miners to make money by not blowing up mountains, by working with nature instead. And the dollar for dollar is not one for one, but the sense of belonging, sense of purpose is really enriching in a deeper way. And he was describing how he talks to his community about climate change. He's like, first of all, I don't say climate change, step one. But I talk to these people and say, hey, you remember childhood? Remember how much it used to snow when we were kids? Oh, yeah. Does it feel like it's snowing a little less now lately? Yeah, don't you want your kids to have the winters that we had? And he's speaking to them. Now, that guy's not going to save the whole Republican Party or all of conservative America, but there are many versions of that human in our country. They need to be funded, as well as Tucker Carlson is funded. They need to be put on a platform as big as Fox News to have the opportunity to help inoculate against this infection. We know what to do. We just got to do it. And I've seen the evidence with my own eyes, so let's get out there and do that.
And I would just add to that, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, I'm done. I'm good.
I would just add to that one thing, and I don't think it's a magic bullet. I don't pretend it's a magic bullet. But those of us who work for publications and media outlets that are identified with the center or with the left, I think have a responsibility to seriously interrogate the arguments made by the center and the left. And I'm not saying that's automatically going to win back the trust of the far right. It won't. But it's the intellectually honest thing to do, and it might win back a few people. And so I think it's important for those of us who have audiences that are predominantly liberal to say things like, there is a serious principled argument against abortion. You don't have to agree with it, but there is. And to pretend otherwise turns off roughly half of the United States. There are seriously arguments about whether many of the things that liberal parts of America have put in on COVID have actually worked. And we should actually have these honest conversations and not pretend that the ideas coming from the left are the truth and that the ideas coming from the right are lies. Because there are a lot of lies coming from the right. There are more lies coming from the right than coming from the left. It's important to say that as well. But it's not as if that liberalism and progressivism has a monopoly on truth. And I think many readers often feel that those of us who they see as on the left or who are actually on the left believe that our ideas have a monopoly on truth, and we're not willing to kind of interrogate them and do them. And I've now ended on a note that we could have another whole hour about, and you could all tell me how wrong I am about major parts of that, but I'm seeing 0 seconds. So I can only end by thanking my wonderful fellow panelists, thanking all of you for coming out. I hope you enjoy the rest of the festival.